What seemingly insignificant moment changed your life forever? I was having beers after work with a group of friends. I was chatting with one of them about travel. I offhandedly made a comment that it would be cool to get an expat assignment in Europe someday, since it would be a great experience for my kids. 6 months later, my office phone rings. The phone number has a country code I don't recognize. I pick it up and the voice on the other end says, "Hi, you Exidor. My name is John Doe," not his real name, "and I heard you would like to live and work in Europe." Turns out the guy I was chatting with mentioned it to the CIO of our company. Mr. Doe called the CIO looking for potential candidates to replace his IT director. The CIO gave him my name. 8 months later, we've sold our house and are on a plane headed to Switzerland. We ended up staying for 7 years. It was life-changing for all of us. All because of a throwaway comment over beers with a buddy. I think another big thing for people to know is that networking doesn't necessarily mean you are actively trying to win or play mind games. As you said, people should definitely network. And that can be as simple as just being honest with people about your goals and ambitions when the natural opportunity presents itself. When someone asks how you like your job, or if you really would prefer something else, but find yourself wanting to be polite, not negative. Instead of saying, "Yeah, it's going really well," say, "Yeah, it's going really well. I'm hoping one day too, but for now it's good and I love that." That is still a polite way of replying, not oversharing, keeping things positive, and also networking. Sometimes you've got to make your own luck. Something similar happened to my dad. My dad was a radio newscaster. When he was 30, he was at a party and ran into someone he'd worked with years before. When he found out that the guy had gone to law school, he wistfully said that he'd always wanted to do that. Several weeks later, an application for law school showed up in the mail. My dad assumed that my mom was hinting at a career change, but he didn't actually ask her about it. He talked to a friend, saying that he couldn't go to law school. He'd be in his mid-30s by the time he graduated. The friend told him that he could be in his mid-30s without a law degree, which helped him make up his mind. Here's the thing that really blows me away. My dad didn't know that people study for the LSAT. He just made an appointment and took it. And aced it! This also explains why, when I was in high school and friends' parents were getting them SAT prep, my parents never mentioned it. They didn't know it was a thing. At any rate, a few years later, he's at another party and runs into that guy again. He had been the one to take the time to get an application sent to my dad. Totally changed his life. My dad loves the law so much. The office I worked in had quite a few expats, including a few Americans. It was interesting to hear some of them constantly complain about the Swiss and how strict everything seemed. They seemed to want Switzerland to be like the USA. Our family motto for our time there was, "It won't always be easy. It won't always be fun, but it will always be an adventure." Once we got used to how things worked, we loved it. The rules and structure made for a clean, safe, and pleasant environment which felt so nice and refreshing for us. We all miss it there too! I was having beers after work with a group of friends. I was chatting with one of them about travel. I offhandedly made a comment that it would be cool to get an expat assignment in Europe someday, since it would be a great experience for my kids. 6 months later, my office phone rings. The phone number has a country code I don't recognize. I pick it up and the voice on the other end says, "Hi, you Exidor. My name is John Doe," not his real name, "and I heard you would like to live and work in Europe." Turns out the guy I was chatting with mentioned it to the CIO of our company. I overheard a conversation in a coffee shop about a job opportunity, applied for it, and it ended up being my dream job. I had a random guy in a library start chatting with me when he saw I was job hunting and he mentioned a company he worked for teaching English in Japan. Had never crossed my mind before. The guy leaves, never see him again, but I Googled the company and they have interviews in my city 1 week from that day. I ended up living in Japan for a year and changing the course of my life and several other people. Something like this happened to me, but with South Korea. For months, I was trying to find a way to move to South Korea to teach, but had no idea how BC I had no teaching experience, and my degree is not in English, it's science. One day, a dude sat next to me on the train. Turns out he had just gotten back from teaching in Korea about a month ago, and his old boss was starting an online school that needed teachers. I got the online English teaching gig, which meant experience with teaching English to actual Korean kids, which led to me actually being able to go and live in Korea. Had an amazing time. Glad it worked out for you. A lot of people who go to Japan to teach English end up trapped in toxic circumstances, unable to leave. In fact, ended up costing a friend of mine his life. Pro tip, don't go to Japan to teach English if you're severely overweight or obese. Doctors there will ignore all your symptoms even if they end up killing you, which it did in his case. Could have easily treated his pneumonia, but instead, they ignored it and put it down to his weight. During my orientation, the only other member of my cohort and I made a vow to not stay more than a year after seeing a lot of very depressed-looking middle managers working there. I did leave in a year. He stayed but switched to work for finance, haha. What did you enjoy and what not enjoy? The job was bit silly. The company and entire industry ended up collapsing before I left. But I liked my students. Those sort of jobs really don't exist anymore in Japan, sadly. Japan was amazing. Was there before the big tourist rush of the 2010s and changed my life. I still visit as often as I can. I overheard a conversation in a coffee shop about a job opportunity, applied for it, and it ended up being my dream job. I had a random guy in a library start chatting with me when he saw I was job hunting, and my brother watched the Aaron Hernandez documentary on Netflix. He dealt with mental illness issues all his life, with it ramping up in intensity the older he got. I'll spare the gory details. When the documentary came out, he said over lunch to my mom, "I think I might have CTE like he did." I mentioned it to me, and I did a little research on it. Saw that Boston University is the place that accepts brain donations post-mortem, and watched a Chris Benoit documentary also focused on CTE. My brother died about a year and a half later. The cops told me and my mom that he'd been dead too long for his organs to be used as transplant donations. We were devastated because my brother had always said he wanted his organs to go to people more worthy than him. Then I remembered that brain donation was a thing. Googled to remember where the brain donation place was, told the coroner, and called Boston University Brain Bank the next morning. They organized the shipping of his brain with the coroner's office. 9 months later, we got the results back. My brother had stage 2 CTE. He was right the whole time. He had brain damage and was physically incapable of thinking through decisions or calming himself down. And it would have gotten worse if he'd lived even longer. I can't explain how complicated the relief is of knowing my brother was right. He couldn't fix it. There was something seriously wrong. Validation and at the same time guilt for all the times family members judged him. There are kids in my community now who have safer sports equipment because of my brother's diagnosis. Hundreds of people in our community know the risk CTE poses. Doctors of my brothers who now can possibly recognize the symptoms in someone else. He played hockey practically from birth through age 30-ish when he wrecked his knee skiing, and most club leagues weren't requiring helmets, not that helmets necessarily prevent concussions, and non-checking leagues weren't available. Plus baseball as a kid, car accidents, and whatever shenanigans he got up to that we never knew about. My brother watched the Aaron Hernandez documentary on Netflix. He dealt with mental illness issues all his life, with it ramping up in intensity the older he got. I'll spare the gory details. When the documentary came out, he said over lunch to my mom, "Not me, but my mother was working 2 jobs and raising my older sister, technically half-sister, in my grandparents' home. She was in her 20s and had just gotten off her evening shift at Dillard's. She was a school teacher during the day. She had plans to go out with her girlfriends that night and came home exhausted and not wanting to go out. She told my grandma she was planning to stay home instead to relax and wanted to be with her daughter, my older sister. My grandma urged her repeatedly to not cancel and to go out and enjoy herself and that she would babysit. She told my mom she deserved it as she had been working so much and hadn't been out with her girlfriend since my sister was born years prior. She eventually agreed, went out, and that's the night she met my dad. It did change my life or I wouldn't be here. I just meant it wasn't directly my story. Sorry, I misspoke and am awful with typing stories on here. Even though I was an English minor and teacher, the internet makes me forget how I want to come across LOL. She was honest with him the second he started flirting with her and hit on her and told him she had a child. They were at a dance club in the 80s. He asked for her number at the end of the night. She gave it to him and expected nothing. He called her a week later and asked her to a hockey game. They started dating after that, engaged less than a year later, and my sister was the junior bridesmaid flower girl at their wedding, and my dad adopted her immediately. Been together ever since and had me and my little sister. It all worked out for the best. I didn't find out my older sister was my half-sister until I was about 10, but we don't even consider it that. Her father wanted nothing to do with her and my mom and left the state and eventually started another family. She finally met him when she was about 35, but by then he was so enthralled and bragging about his family that she wanted nothing to do with him. My dad has always been her father and the best man to exist. Not me, but my mother was working 2 jobs and raising my older sister, technically half-sister, in my grandparents' home. I saw an ad for a local festival that was looking for volunteers. I was down, really down. I was unemployed, single, friendless, and had mental health issues. I saw this ad. I liked a handful of bands and didn't have the money for the tickets, so why not volunteer? I had nothing better to do. I was supposed to be just a weekend and then back to my dark life. However, among other volunteers, I met a man who offered me to join his laughing yoga class for free, because you need it, he said. I met a woman who went through the same mental health issues I had. I felt a kinship, and seeing how great she was after years of therapy convinced me to try it. I met a kind couple who invited me to their board game nights just to try. And I discovered a love for board games since board games are more than Monopoly. I didn't know that. And various other people who just offered their kind friendships. And suddenly, I had weekly therapy appointments, yoga classes every week, board games nights every week, dinner with friends every so often. I had a social life. Thanks to therapy, mental health became way better. Thanks to being social again, my self-confidence and happiness improved as well. Being confident led me to try to apply for jobs even if I didn't have all the skills asked. And being more comfortable in social settings meant I was better at job interviews. Also, various friends in the same town mean they hear about job opportunities that aren't on the market yet. Their colleague who is going to retire soon, or someone at their company who is going to get sacked because they're that bad. So, a whole hidden job market that I had no idea existed open to me. So, more job opportunities, more soft skills, some skills I learned while I volunteered, and more confidence for, and finally stable mental health. You guessed it, I finally found a job. Not only a job, but one that I love, and I was able to keep. Just because one day I saw an ad and said, why not? I saw an ad for a local festival that was looking for volunteers. I was down, really down. I was unemployed, single, friendless, and had telling a friend that yes, I would watch her son at my house. I've always babysat, but usually at other people's homes. My friend needed me to watch her son at my house because her husband worked the night shift and slept during the day. Her 16-month-old son had been going to another friend's house, but when my friend went to pick him up after work, he had a bottle of the lady's son's prescription medication in his hands, and Mom realized that the lady wasn't watching him. He also wouldn't sleep at night because the lady slept all day and let the toddler sleep all day, too, so that she wouldn't have to do anything except occasionally change his diaper and feed him some lunch. After I started watching him, my friend was so amazed because finally he was sleeping all night long. Oh, toddlers can sleep at night. She really couldn't pay me much, but she paid me what she could. I still babysat on the side, and she told anyone and everyone looking for childcare that they could trust me, so I was babysitting multiple children at my house. And while it didn't make me rich, I had plenty to live a decent life on and made some lifelong family friends. At one point, I had a waiting list because I couldn't take on anymore. It also helped me to realize that I enjoy teaching toddlers and preschoolers. Almost the same thing happened to me. It all started with me being a Saham, and a friend asked if I could watch her daughter during the day. That little 2-year-old girl jumped into my and my kids' hearts, and it all went from there. I went from making zero income to being home with my kids and being on such a tight budget that we couldn't go out and do much. I ended up with 4 other kids, a minivan, and money to take them all out for fun outings. But even better, it got my kids more engaged, and they loved all of the kids like siblings. It was like getting paid to have the big family I always wanted, but being able to have evenings with just my kids, so we were able to have that super close bond that can be hard to maintain in large families. It reminds me of my old barber. From like a year ago, the dude is still young. He was telling me how one of his clients had a child with autism, and getting a haircut was a nightmare. So he volunteered to do it after hours. Same barbershop, just when no one else would be there. This eventually evolved to the barber show having a special day for it because of the amount of other parents who found out about it. Oh hey, I'm autistic and I hated getting my hair cut. I was fine about getting my hair cut, no problems about that. What I couldn't stand and dreaded was the barber talking to me and trying to engage me in conversation. The chit-chat was unnerving and I didn't know how to respond, so I clammed up and wouldn't say anything. Even when he was done and held up a mirror for me to see and approve the results, I couldn't stand it. If he had simply cut my hair with zero interaction, I would have been fine. I learned how to cut my hair and beard as a young man and did my own for years and years. I eventually learned to navigate life and can now mostly pass as normal, but it took decades to get there. Thank you for helping those children through what can be a harrowing experience that doesn't make sense to outsiders. Those children know what you are doing for them and are grateful for it, even if they can't express it right now. My son hated to get his hair cut as a toddler, and he would cry and wiggle around the whole time. My husband has some Asperger's traits, and so did my son back then, especially with strangers touching him. One woman at a walk-in salon just stood there like a mannequin, never bothering to interact with him at all. Then my sister said she has a sweet friend who cuts hair, and she was great with him and he didn't cry at all. So I know parents are grateful for salon workers who understand kids' quirks. Telling a friend that yes, I would watch her son at my house. I've always babysat, but usually at other people's homes. My friend needed me to watch her son at my house because her husband worked the night shift and slept during the day. It's Christmas shopping season, November 20th, 2005. My then fiancé and I were at a local mall doing some shopping for friends and family. We leave Suncoast empty-handed and begin to walk towards where there's a main entrance. There's the main hallway of the mall. Moments later, my now wife stopped us in our tracks. She had just remembered that Friends season DVDs would be a great gift for someone. So we start walking back to the Suncoast. As we were almost back, a series of gunshots went off, but it took a bit to realize they were gunshots. The way the gunshots echoed up and down the long strip of the mall made it initially difficult to tell what the source of the sound was. Several people then froze in place. Someone yelled, "Gunshots!" and the shots got louder, higher in frequency. Maybe that was him switching from his pistol to his MAC-90, not sure. Anyways, I and others rushed from the front of the store to a group of older people who were just standing there, frozen in place out in the open, herding them into the store. I can't be sure, but it felt like a couple dozen people at least were crammed into the store, someone dropping the security gate down. But as the shots kept going off, and the screaming from those shots ongoing, we realized this was no gang dispute or something. It was 05, and mall mass shootings weren't so much a thing, so it took a while to figure it out. We were locked in the Suncoast for a short time, with the see-through metal security gate in place. Others saw us as fish in a barrel, so we got the employees to let us out the back. I think we got out before hostages were taken at the Sam Goody, not sure. As we left, it was pretty chaotic outside. Cops trying to get in and people trying to get out. Had we kept on our original course and had my wife not stopped us, we would have been right in front of the shooter when he opened fire. It was a difference of walking like 15 seconds one way or the other, either back to the store or directly to where the shooting started when it started. It trips me out, thinking about how differently it could have gone down. Oh wow, I was working at that mall when it happened. Hid in a dressing room with customers for 2-ish hours before anyone could get us out because our back hallway connected to Sam Goody. I can count the times I've been to a mall since on one hand. The same goes for movie theaters and music venues. Anything with limited exits. Even now, with a ton of therapy, it always finds a way to creep back into my brain. I was going to school to get my teaching degree when it happened. Quit because of mental health. Stopped and started school twice since didn't think I could be a teacher leading kids through an active shooter drill. I'm another year into college now and I'm going to finish this time. Now I'm a parent to small kiddos and realize there's something much worse than me dying. It's Christmas shopping season, November 20th, 2005. My then fiancé and I were at a local mall doing some shopping for friends and family. I was picking up my little sister from the stables. I was waiting as she always took forever to get ready. I saw an empty horse box that was dirty and I cleaned it. Took about 30 minutes. When I was finishing up, the owner of the horse that lived in the box came and asked why I cleaned it. I said I had some extra time. She was so happy as she was running late for a birthday party for her son, I think. A couple of weeks later, I cold called for a job at company that I admired. Head of HR was the lady from the stables. She called me in for a cup of coffee and 45 minutes later, I had my dream job. I was picking up my little sister from the stables. A Facebook ad for a local vet clinic that needed a veterinary assistant. No experience needed. I spent 15 years in human trauma medicine, EMT, then airborne combat medic in the US Army, but was burned out as heck and just coming out of some postpartum depression from my second kid. My best friend majorly pressured me to apply, which I did, got the job at $14 an hour. All of my skills and knowledge from my past in emergency medicine came rushing back, and I transitioned to vetted seamlessly. I had an amazing seasoned vet tech who trained me on one for the first year, and then I changed clinics and quickly rose to lead tech and led an amazing team. A year ago, I went into veterinary hospital management and got my RVT certification in my state. I now manage a team of 37 staff across 2 busy veterinary hospitals, and I am incredibly happy in what I do. I'm getting paid a living wage that I can support my family with. If my best friend had not been in town and seen that Facebook ad, I would still be struggling to make ends meet teaching piano lessons in my home, wondering what I'm going to do with my life. A Facebook ad also changed my life. My workplace was on strike and I was home with nothing to do, so I was browsing Facebook kind of compulsively to keep up on strike news. Then, I saw an ad for a fellowship in an area that at the back of my mind I'd always thought might be a good fit for me, but I had no training. Being on strike at the time, I had plenty of free time to put together a decent application package and landed the position. I had been a precarious contract worker, university sessional. After the fellowship, I landed a full-time 13-month-long contract and then a permanent full-time position a month after the contract ended. If I play my cards right, I might even have a decent pension despite landing my first permanent full-time job in my 50s. I'm also able to afford my apartment now and was able to extricate myself from living with roommates for the first time as well. That was a big, big change thanks to one little Facebook ad. A Facebook ad for a local vet clinic that needed a veterinary assistant. No experience needed. I spent 15 years in human trauma medicine, EMT, my last sip of alcohol. Didn't expect to wake up the next day and never drink again, but that's what I did. 300 plus days sober. Rebuilding my life. Undoing 20 years of physical and emotional ruin. When I closed my eyes that night or passed out, I figured I'd wake up and have my morning coffee with whiskey, but I didn't. My dad went to treatment in 1997 when I was just 10 years old, and he's been sober since then. I wanted to tell you thank you for what you're doing. It 100% changed the course of my life for the better to have sober parents because they stayed together and were able to provide for us in a stable home. Getting sober was the ultimatum my mom gave him. She was ready to walk, but they've made it over 40 years together now. Keep it up, my friend. My last sip of alcohol. Didn't expect to wake up the next day and never drink again, but that's what I did. 300 plus days sober. Rebuilding my life. Undoing 20 years of physical and emotional ruin. When I closed my eyes that night or passed out, I figured I'd wake up and